So how are we going to use this to control the Force? I thought for this month's video game sketch, we could potentially look at making a Force-themed video game. And what I wanted to explore is what it would be like to actually navigate the non-physical hurdles of using the Force, which is why we have all these sine waves on screen. I've begun exploring different options for sine waves. I have to give a lot of credit to different forums that I followed. Here's the one that I used to make this fun little laser beam in the GameMaker forum community, because there's so much interesting insight out there on what kind of math to use. This particular person here, I ended up using a lot, so thank you so much for your insight. And there wasn't one wrong sine wave, it was just trying to find one that I could work with. And we definitely need to start by building our first player character as I talk about the different techniques we're going to be using to control the Force. I think it's interesting to think about the Force as something you use to do something, usually to interact with a physical object. You might use the Force to push a rock, or use the Force to lift a droid, or use the Force to close a door, or use the Force to electrocute someone. There are a lot of physical or tangible representations, but I feel it's hard to visualize what some of those obstacles might look like when trying to communicate and actually use the Force. But here's my approach on what that might look and feel like. And I first got this idea because I was pacing my apartment after releasing my earlier Clover video game project, and I stumbled across a Lego set that I haven't put together yet of Luke lifting the X-Wing out of the swamp. And I thought that's a really fun idea. What if you had to overcome a series of skill checks or challenges that visualize these more inner struggles of communicating with the Force? So I broke down these potential struggles into 3 different steps, and we'll start with the lifting phase and then go backwards from there. So in regards to lifting, that's what these sine waves are for. I thought it would be fun to have a player learn to control a sine wave to create a sense of harmony to achieve their goal, if that makes any sense. Experimenting with a couple different sine waves, I found one that I like that was pretty nice and turbulent. So why don't we go ahead and dive into this one and see what we can make with it. So we have our beginning player, but we also needed something for them to lift. So we quickly sketched out just a basic droid, and a lot of these beginning assets are very temporary, and they'll be replaced with more permanent temporary assets later. And of those few different sine waves, I really gravitated to this one from Dimitri, and I went ahead and added some modifier commands to it. So as you press up or down, the sine wave will also go up and down. And we plop all that into our room, and then here we have it. We can have our player character, we have the object in question, and we have a really crazy cool looking sine wave. And then as I press up and down on the arrow keys, you can see the sine wave gets more and less distorted until eventually it harmonizes in a nice, complete, perfect line. Our goal is to have our object to lift up to a goal position, but only once the sine wave is perfectly in a uniform line. And now with that mostly working, I just played around with the sine wave a little bit more because I wanted to create something super fragmented and distorted. And to do that, I really needed to understand what was going on inside Dimitri's code. And to help with that, I began breaking out each individual step into just something that made sense to me. Even creating small little notes here, a small number to this particular noise be undulate. We'll make it really, really chaotic, and the larger will make it very, very, very swimmy like Jello. But having these broken out allowed me to know which ones I can manipulate easier. And while I was in there coding, I thought it might be fun to have a secondary kind of small skill check. Maybe there's this ball or kind of floating orb that's bouncing from screen left to screen right. And when you hit it in the right spot, it has a chance to greatly reduce your sine wave. If you hit in the wrong spot, it'll make it really, really, really chaotic. Let's continue with a lift, because we have a sine wave and we have some variable distortion, but we now need to get our buddy to get lifted up too. But to lift our buddy, we definitely have to lift him out of somewhere. So I'm throwing together some quick sprites and a bit of a sprite sheet. It allows us to draw a map on the screen, which is perfect because now we have this gross looking swampish, I don't know, just kind of quick and dirty, no pun intended, that our friend will sit in and you'll have to struggle to lift him out. So we'll spawn him in specific X and Y coordinates, which should be roughly right about here. When he's in there, he'll be stuck. We'll also kind of give him a bit of shaking using cosine and sine like crazy. But the more turbulent our sine wave is, the more turbulent our droid will be. So this gives us quite a shaky object to try to lift out of the ground. And you can notice as my sine is more in harmony, our object doesn't shake around as much. But as our wave loses that harmony and becomes more distorted, it shakes around like crazy. And the idea is to show struggle. So there'll be less struggle when you're more in tune with the Force, and there'll be more struggle the farther away you are from it. But it's also important for us to figure out how to lift our friend out. Hitting down, he's moving up, doesn't make any sense. And I'm hitting up and he's moving down. Isn't that interesting? And I kind of love that because it makes it a little unintuitive. Everyone's going to be focused on this object. And when they focus on this object using the up and down arrows to lift them, they're going to inevitably fail because they're focused on the wrong thing. You want to focus on this guy back here. And you can see as we find harmony, our friend begins to shake less and he gets really smooth. And we'll call that a success. Like, that's pretty cool. So that's the overall concept of lifting the object out of the ground. And it kind of functionally works, but we need to continue nudging it in the right direction and maybe adding a little bit of visual flair to it as well, so it doesn't look as boring. So in regards to visual flair, a palette's a great place to start because it allows you to have some parameters to build within. And if we're building a murky, swampy environment and a hero, these colors here give me some things to play with. We're going to end up trying to make an environment out of these limited 3 colors, a background out of these, and then we'll see what part of these 7 colors we can use for the character down the road. But with that, I drew our first environment. I mean, it's a little bit better. We have just a simple tile to use. And then I was trying to figure out what water could look like, or a swampy water. I initially just drew these just to have some variety, so it's all not all same. But I haven't done this before. It's my first time. When I went into the tile set, I found out that you can actually do tile animation within the tile set. And I thought that was crazy fantastic. So we have these 4 different frames of our top water and our bottom water. And as we play, it's a little guy. Look at that. That's our top water. And it's our bottom water. It's not perfect, but you know, it's not bad. But this has been a really fun discovery. And then to make it a bit more responsive for the player, we also made some arrow keys. Well, specifically, I just made the 1 arrow key. I have an off and an on state. And then I just made a series of objects that rotate the image based on the direction of the arrow key. And then we position all that in the room. And I think if we hit play, there might be one more fun discovery. We also gave our sine wave a bit of a color. And as I get further and further away from what is considered a success, the value of the sine wave changes colors. So I think it's pretty interesting. And we can see our little water animating down here. The logic for the sine wave is getting a little bit more intense. I keep commenting things out that I don't think I need, but I like to keep in there. And as far as the sine wave color, this became so interesting to me because I kept choosing a color inside the sprite editor. I'm like, oh, I want this color. This color is 204/174, right? I'll go put that in. Or this hex value, right? So then you go over and you put it in, but it doesn't actually work. I don't know if I've documented where I found this, and typos, if you notice them, they're little Easter eggs. But you basically have to multiply what you find inside the sprite editor by these values here. Convert your new hue, new saturation, new value into this guy. Then you can draw them, and it works. But it took a lot of steps. I might be understanding it a little bit wrong, and some of this information might be semi-accurate. But this is how I digested at the time of me learning it. I don't know if anywhere on the GameMaker website they have this information easily accessible, because here it definitely makes it sound like I'm going to correlate those values with these values in the sprite editor, but it doesn't happen. And if it's in here somewhere, it tells me not to do that, and then I'm just dumb. That's totally fine because it's all just learning. But the radio wave of the sine wave still felt a little too disconnected. I didn't want people to compare this to just tuning an AM FM radio. So I started looking into my first time fun little effects. Look, we have a screen shake now, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The effect I want to show you, where is it? Oh, here. Found it. Recursive blur. So there's a lot of different effects types that you can add to layers, and you can actually control these settings inside the code for GameMaker. So referencing the screen shake that I talked about earlier, inside our Obect character, which I guess is the name of our droid, just because I renamed him at some point and I didn't notice it. So he's just Obect now. So here's Obect, our little buddy. And within the step event, if your user is attempting to train, then we're going to go ahead and set the FX screen shake to visible. And we're actually going to customize these parameters to shake depending on how much turbulence is inside the sine wave. But we also updated our user sprites. Let me play it first. I want to show you the sine wave, and then we'll take a look at our little buddy. So here it is. So now the sine wave is a bit more blurry and fuzzy, and it's really cool on my desktop app. It doesn't do this on the web browser, but there's like these weird clamping artifacts happening with a sine wave that I really love. And then as we lift our guy up, depending on the chaos, the sine wave, the color begins to change from white to green. And you might be noticing as well, as I'm hitting these up and down arrow keys, our little guy using the force. Not using the force. Using the force. Not using the force. It's kind of silly. And I just sketched him out fairly quickly. So he's not a super refined sprite. But you can see I went through a couple different versions. This is our first one. And then I just roughed in a simple shape. And then I just begin to kind of add detail until we have what we have right now. It'll be more improved, but I would say that it's definitely way better than that, and definitely a lot better than that. Sometimes you just gotta start with an idea. But I think it turned out pretty cute. And instead of a new user, we have our idle pose and our lifting pose. I know this is not costume accurate to the particular point in the film, but it's the costume that I wanted to make because it just felt right. Yeah, it's perfect. And then also what you might be able to notice, there's a lot of these little white dots, and I added the live air that we had in the Clover game. But then as you use the Force, the white dots move from screen right to screen left, like you're really connecting. They're not very big though, so I might make them big later. I went ahead and took a pass at adding larger live air, so you can see without pressing the button you can barely notice it. When you press the button they get really nice and big. Also added an in-between pose, so if you're actively trying to train, your character will at least look like this, but then as you begin to stop training, your object droid will fall back down to the ground and your character will go back into idle pose, and all the live air bits calm down as well. I also, in this particular version, as I'm trying to do more to show when the player is further off from connecting with this sine wave back here, the object will begin to drift back and forth. It'll like falter a little bit. I'm gonna continue finessing this, but we do have a somewhat semi-complete stage when you are really connected and in tune. Let's see if I can get there. Boom. Yeah, the wave disappears. Our object is not high enough for that to happen, so we need to fix that a little bit. But we're getting the right pieces in there, which is fantastic. I also think the current sphere mechanic of adding variety to your already kind of complicated sine wave isn't probably the most beneficial thing to do to the player right now. So I'm going to go ahead and take it off, and we can always circle back to it later if we find a good use for it. So there's a couple of bugs still left, but remember there are 3 mechanics we're going to be exploring. The lift explores the idea of trying to find balance kind of in the Force in a weird way, and trying to manipulate those sine waves to really connect and strengthen that communication. The other mechanic we're going to explore is fear. So as it's mentioned in the films, if you have fear, it can lead to dark side, stuff like that. It also can hinder your own confidence in yourself when you're afraid to do something. So what does fear look like through these series of skill checks? And I thought we can start with this red bar, not a lightsaber. We might have to change this design a little bit later, but I thought we could start with this fear bar. And I spent a lot of time just learning more math. I need to go back to math school. But we're going to start by creating a fear bar spawner. And here we can designate how many bars we want to spawn. And I'm going to rotate them 360 degrees around the character. And I started by storing our actual player characters, X and Y. And we're going to get the length direction between the beginning position of our orbit. And we're going to offset it 32 pixels away from the character. And then we can use point direction to determine where our fear bars need to point when they're revolving around the character. And we'll have an orbit start variable that will increase as we go left and right, and it will go away from the character towards the character as we go up and down. And at the beginning of the step, our image angle of our actual fear bars will be the orbit start. And I can kind of show you what that might look like without this modification. Boom! Now you can see when we use the Force, we have these little fun bars. What I wanted them to be kind of surrounding the character. It took me way too long to connect the dots on this one, but if I rotate the bars by an additional 90 degrees as I'm orbiting them, look at that. We have a fun little shield. But what I thought we could do is as you're trying to lift the object in question, at a certain point, fear begins to strike in. You need to protect yourself. And to do that, I thought these red bars could spawn, and these little fear specters will spawn throughout the screen and try to hit you. And what you'll try to do is block off the fear specters with these bars. And as it hits the bars, they'll change from red to white. But as they hit you, it'll reduce one of the bars at random back to fractured, which is this red color. We have this rotation mechanic down, which is a good place to start. But we still need to figure out how to spawn in like these weird specters that are going to hinder the player. Before jumping straight into that, I did add a little bit of extra wave to him just to give it a bit more life. You see how they shake a little bit? I don't know, I think it's just nice, you know? But as far as our fear specters, if you will, I quickly mocked up this little bit of a sprite. It's kind of a hot mess, but I just wanted to be this unidentified object, and it'd be cool to have a couple different ones that could spawn, but right now we're just starting with this weird fireball looking gross thing. And similar to the fear bars, we have our Spectre spawner, which is going to try to spawn a Spectre Spectre at a certain point in the room. So if we're training and the spawn count is less than the spawn cap, then we'll go ahead and run this alarm, which triggers whether or not we can spawn a Spectre. I probably need to add a little bit of extra logic in here to make sure Spectres don't spawn on top of each other. But, you know, functionality, it kind of works. But I think I kind of plumbed in some of the basic logic. So your character starts here and he begins to lift. And at a certain point in lifting, the Spectres spawn. You can see our object droid is faltering because we're far away from our goal. Okay, so there we go. So our bars spawn. I went ahead and made them smaller, and they're larger when they're far away. And for this particular demo, I only have the 3 of them spawning. But as the Spectre hits this, you can see it begins to heal because we're blocking away the fear. And as the Spectre hits our character, you can see it shatters back into a broken state. And to make things a little bit more difficult, I have the bars constantly moving, so you can't just like keep them in one spot. It forces you to work for it a little bit. So once all the bars have been hit and turned white, they spin really fast and scale down to the core of your character. So the idea is that you've blocked all the fear. It's no longer in your way. You earned or gained that courage, and you should be able to try to communicate without having to worry too much about the Spectres anymore. I also wanted to find a way to finesse it up and juice it up a little bit more, but I don't know, it's not horrible. Let's see if we can get this last one so we can see the final animation pose again. Boom. Shoom. But the idea works, right? And to accomplish this, I had to add a lot more different steps and alarms. Maybe it got a little bit more complicated than it should have gotten complicated. And you can see I've also typed up some angsty debug messages because I was confused why certain things are happening. And this event, I wasn't using my alarm correctly, so that one was on me. But using instance place for our fear Spectres, if it hits a fear bar, it'll go through a process of being destroyed. And the destroyed process, assuming it hits a player, it will go through and reduce the spawn count, obviously, so more Spectres can spawn. I then have a DS list to store our fear bars and their individual instance IDs. And then for all the fear bars that I find one that has a image size that does not equal 2, because for our different states, 2 is fully broken, 1 is kind of broken, and 0 is healed. So as long as the image of whatever it found doesn't equal 2, and then I'll go ahead and add it to a temporary array, and then I will just get the array length and pick a random fear bar from it. And then for hitting it, we just, destroy the fear bar and spawn a new one. So pretty straightforward. I did get to a point with these fear bars where I thought it'd be really fun if they just felt a little bit more ethereal in a way. I thought maybe a good way to do that is to store their previous positions in a DS grid and then draw those behind the fear bar as it rotates. And the result's okay, I think. It's a little poppy. I think I might be off on a frame with how I'm looping through them. I don't hate it, but I also don't love it. I find it kind of confusing. So I might pass on this for now. It did take me a better part of a couple days to figure out. So it does seem sad not to use it, but I just don't think it's feeling appropriate. So I went ahead and took that out. Now that the fear bars are done, it's time for us to move to the third and final skill check. So to recap, we have the sine wave, which is kind of a fun visual representation of finding balance and everything, which I really like. And while you're lifting up the object, fear begins to creep in, and you have to block off these Spectres that represent fear and doubt. When you succeed that skill check, your character becomes stronger, and it's no longer an issue for this particular exercise. Those 2 skill checks done, the third skill check is actually going to be the first skill check, and I thought it'd be really fun to do a breathing exercise, but bear with me on this. Usually in the films, when you're watching people use the Force for the first time, there's a small moment of pause where they're exhaling and they're getting ready to begin their training. So I thought we could potentially do the same thing, and our little buddy, the sphere bar, might be a fun way to do that. But I was thinking you can use your arrow keys to navigate this sphere up and down, and this sphere can be some sort of visual representation of breathing. And when you're moving it up and down, you're trying to hit little targets that allow your character to breathe in and breathe out, if that makes sense. You do this 3 times and it's success, and that allows you to proceed to the next exercise, which is lifting the object out of the swampy water. So I think that's going to work. That sounds like a fun idea, but I don't know how to make it really look interesting, but we're gonna figure it out. One way to potentially do it is to have our object move on the path of a sine wave, and maybe there's another sine wave, and that sine wave will have like peaks like here, and you're trying to go up during the peak and down during the dips. But I don't know, I'm wondering if it might be too much of the same thing. Fun, but not it, you know? I went ahead and added another sine wave to kind of help show the path of the sphere. And it isn't 100% accurate because I am inverting the direction of the sphere depending if it hits 0 or the width of the room. And by doing that, you can see the white sine wave kind of flip and bounce because I'm going from a positive number to a negative number. I don't know. I think maybe we lose the sine waves altogether. But before we leave the sine waves, do you remember that motion blur that we used that didn't work out? So because the sphere isn't going to be following the track of a sine wave, I was trying to think of how else you can make it look visually interesting. And I thought, what if it had a trail of spheres behind it? And because your sphere is gradually going to be getting smoother and smoother as you breathe in and breathe out, it would be fun to see your past behind you and how that all evens out. So just copy and pasting the logic over from the sphere bars, we do have a sphere and it is doing the thing, and that's nice. But I think we need to work out a couple kinks. And here we go, this is way better. So now our sphere follows our sphere, and there's no flashing or flickering anymore. We still need to get rid of this sine wave behind here. But can you imagine a nice trail of spheres that are following along? Okay, so I was liking the direction we're going with the motion blur of the spheres, but now we needed the spheres to actually look like something. It's supposed to resemble breathing, so I thought something that kind of gives you the idea of air would be good. So for drawing what that sphere might look like, again, it's just a sketch, it's just a concept. I thought maybe we do something like that, but it began to feel too much like a bubble. So I moved on from that to something that kind of looked like it was a weird flying flame tooth. And then I was remembering Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I was thinking about the avatar symbol of air and what it would look like if that was rotating. I think that turned out pretty well, and I got excited about it, and I decided to draw something up like that. I thought this could be the representation of our air ball. Hopefully it flows a little bit more like air in its own weird way, and we can have different sizes of air as well. So as your breathing gets more and more in tune and aligned, the disturbance or frequency becomes very smooth and solid. And you throw little motion trails. Look at that. Look at them go. They're all just flying behind. And look at this. We can go up, down. That's not bad, right? I'm pretty tickled with that. I think that turned out really nice. And not bad for a quick sketch. Cool. So we have this guy moving around doing its best bits. And ideally none of this other stuff happens until we've succeeded in this breathing skill check. So now we need to add some goalposts for our little air ball to hit, so we know if we're doing a good job or not. What is a goalpost if it not just a series of blue, green, and red? And we'll spawn those at 2 different locations in the room. And hopefully if our sphere air breathe bubble hits this, it'll trigger success. And the way that I'm detecting it is I'm looking for duration of time it hit it. So when the air bubble hits the breathe window for the first time, it's going to clock its X in this variable. And then when it exits the breathe window, it'll register what its stop position was. And then now that I have the start and the stop position, I can get that total value. And that total value was greater than or equal to my desired value, which is 80% of the breathe window sprite width. Then we'll call that a success. And if you have 2 successes in a row, then that triggers the air bubble to go down smaller in size. And every time the air bubble hits one edge of the screen, it'll reset your success. So you need to make sure you get 2 before it hits the edge of the screen. So now if we hit play, we have our breathe windows, and then let's see if this works. So up, green, green, boom. And now the air bubble is smaller. Let's try it again on this next pass here. Green, green, boom. And now the air bubble is smaller. One more time. Green, green, boom. And now the air bubble is done, and then it fades away. And now when it finishes fading away, we can go into our next skill check, which is lifting this guy. And then of course at a certain point, this buddy turns on and the specters begin to spawn. So, you know, it's beginning to take shape. But we do need it to finesse it a little bit more. And I think I forgot to mention it, but the live air that's moving from screen to screen left when you're doing your force connection stuff, you're lifting, I thought it'd be fun to emulate the breathing as well. So I'll zoom in on this, but if I go up on my arrow key, the live air moves up. And if I go down on my arrow key, the live air moves down. And it's very gradual. I think I might make that bigger, but you can see it kind of emulates the breathing a little bit, which is kind of fun. Okay, I don't love this, but I was trying to find something better than this. And this is what I could come up with in a small amount of time. It looks like glass tubes, maybe. I don't know. These aren't for me. I'm gonna replace these at some point, but they're better placeholders that just feels a bit more on purpose, even though it doesn't look like it's in the right direction. I also gave them a little bit of float, and I added a bit more variety to our air bubbles, just in terms of animation. And I think everything should work. Yeah, that's vibing. That fades away ever so slowly, and then boop, it crashes because I need to change the name of sine wave, but that's fine. We'll do that. But this is working. It's getting better. Okay, I added a few more things, but I really wanted to share with you some new information because I just learned something pretty cool. And I think to demonstrate this, I'm going to reduce my changes. Okay, so let's get nerdy for just 2 seconds, I promise. Oh, right, I added some more stuff. I'm excited to share it with you. So, okay, I'll go over the stuff that I added first, and then I'll talk about the nerdy bit. Okay, so watch our buddy. I grayed out the other arrows that we don't need. Hopefully that comes across the areas that we do need. And watch our little buddy here. He breathes. Look at that. Inhale. Exhale. It's kind of fun. So we gave him a little breathing animation, and also you might be able to see some subtle sine waves appearing. I thought it'd be fun just to, as you get closer and closer to accomplishing this breathe skill check, these sine waves begin to become more opaque. And I'm choosing blue specifically for the sine wave color here because we're going to be doing green for the lift check, and then I'm hoping to do some sort of red for the Spectres. And then also, as you go up and down with your breathing, I did make the live air bits a little bit heavier just so they come across better. So down and then up. Not bad, right? But the nerdy bit that I wanted to share with you is I'm going to hit my debug screen, and I'm going to point your attention to this. So this is 2 debug variables that pop in the reference of an instance. One is the reference of an instance that the arrow is hitting. So if I go up, it hits this one, which is ref instance 100024. If I go down, it hits this one, which is ref instance 10023. And this particular variable is the instance stored in a DS grid, is here. When I create the breathe windows, I'm using a temporary variable to create them inside this layer. Then I'm going ahead and taking the opportunity to store that into a DS grid so I can access its X and Y and start coordinates and stuff like that down the road. Because as the air bubble passes through the breathe windows, I wanted to capture its start X and its end X so I can compare it in one bunch at the bottom. I am trying to get better at using AE nums, but in this example, I just create a bunch of temp variables to reference position points inside our DS grids. But just so you know, I'm not lying. Look, I'm using enums, I'm getting better. I created enums for player states and enums for skill check states. And also my global variable declaration is way better than it was in my last project. I'm learning, but there's only so much time, and sometimes it's just easier to do what's easy, and then you can make it look pretty later. In regards to my code, it's definitely not pretty, but it works. So I have these temp variables, and down here for debug variable A, one of those 2 variables that I was pointing towards, it's storing the instance that the air bubble is colliding with. And then for the other one, the one that was static and wasn't changing, it's retrieving the instance ID of the object we created here, right? That's all it's doing. But I want this game to play in HTML5, and I was getting errors or inconsistencies in my collisions, and I'll show you why. Mind-blowing. New to me, mind-blowing. So there's the same game in HTML5. Breathe once to spawn the air, and breathe again to spawn the windows. I'm gonna hit the debug screen. So now instead of saying ref instance 100 whatever and ref instance 100 whatever, it says 100 whatever and then ref 100 whatever. It's way different than what it's like when running this through desktop mode. And that was part of the problem. The solution for that is really simple. The too long don't read that. I don't know why HTML5 is functioning differently than GameMaker Studios 2 window mode, but after doing some trial and error and just printing out different debugs, I learned that quite simply, instance place is going to return instance ID, check. But when I store an instance create layer into my DS grid, it's just storing a reference to the entire instance, not just the instance ID. I need just the ID. So all I gotta do is say, instead of storing the entire reference to the instance, just give me just the ID number. And now when I go back and play in HTML5, look at that, no more ref. It works It works great. And now the issues I was experiencing earlier are gone, which is basically the successes weren't triggering because it was never colliding with the same instance because it was looking at the reference instead of the actual thing. Well, hopefully that makes sense to somebody because I think that's pretty cool. And then just to show you, it works in both places and it's nice to be specific as you can. And that's what I learned from that. In short, I summarized all that for me down here because I got really excited about solving that problem that was quite tricky. And maybe one thing that I haven't mentioned quite yet is as you solve this breathe check a little bit, the chaoticness of that air bubble, the sine wave that it's on, gets way reduced to show that you're getting more of an even control of your breathing. Anyway, that's that. That's good, right? So this skill check finishes, and also when the character is idle, he blinks. This is my blinking logic. It took me way too long to figure it out because I wanted to have like random blinks, but we got it working. So now if you want, you can just launch the game and quite literally just watch the character blink. Beautiful. So now that we have a breathe check that's looking pretty good, but I do want to polish up this a little bit more. So we're going to transition from this weird, gross looking thing that I've made into another weird, gross thing that I made. I'm not saying it's any better, but maybe it is. But we have something that kind of looks like something, and you know, we'll go with it for now. But here we are. We have this. That's not too bad. And then inside the step event of the Spectre, I decided to go ahead and add another bit of a cosine wave here, just to give it a little bit more undulation. And the favorite part about what I added, oops, this is my old Clover logic for research. So as the fear spawns, I just want to be a bit more creepier than just being an overlay on top of the green background. And we're going to accomplish that in a few different ways. One is we're going to have a fear background color that gets lifted when the fear specters begin to spawn. Two is inside our fear bar spawner, we're actually going to add a glow effect to our fear skill checks just to give it a bit more drama. And I think with all that being said, we have our breathe check, and then it's time to lift our little buddy up. And then there it is. We have our little fear specters. This feel a bit more chaotic, a bit more weird looking. Again, in my head, I was originally picturing as like bats or something, but that's what we have. And once they'll disappear, all the courage goes into your body, and then you can continue with this final trial of trying to solve this sine wave puzzle in a way that doesn't drive you mad. And I've done this puzzle 1,000 times, so I know exactly how to solve it. I do need to make sure sometimes you can solve it when your character is too low on the ground, but it's all working for the most part. There's many more things I want to add to this game, but we're also running a little bit out of time. So I'm going to add a bit more pizzazz to our fear specters, and I need a little bit of a congrats message and some music as well, and then also fix that weird listing thing where our object isn't at the right height. So we'll fix those 4 things before I think we call this project done. Okay, I wasn't sure where to start, but I decided to do this fun little effects animation for when the fear specters get destroyed. And then I also went forward, and for our object user, I gave him a little bit of a shake when he gets hit. Pretty straightforward. A little bit of a shimmy shimmy. And then we have our thank you message as well. So let's see what it looks like. So these are 2 of the 4 things we still have to do. So we still have to do the sound, and we need to fix that weird Y issue with our character, with our object. But I think for the most part, we have a somewhat finished concept. Okay, I got really distracted on that. So we did the breathing exercises. And now we're going to proceed with our droid. I gave him a bit of a facelift. Okay, and then our fear spawn, and when they explode, they kind of shatter and rain, and when they hit you, they just do it a little bit when they hit you. And I also changed the speed a little bit so it doesn't feel too crazy if they're close or if they're far away, because before they felt very, very fast when they were close, so you could just like spin and constantly defend them, which is exactly what I'm doing here, and it's actually working. So not a perfect game, check succeeded. So now we need to try to get this working. Which it works sometimes, but not all the time, and I feel like I know how to fix it, but I just need time to fix it. Boom, training complete. And that's done. We did it. Game over. So that works. So the last steps is literally just to add music and see if we can kind of refine the lifting of that object and go over what's next for this project. But I effectively have one more day to work on this. So I'm going to go ahead and get some sleep, come back first thing in the morning and see if we can knock this out. But I've really been enjoying the learning process so far, but let's get cracking on to the next step. And just like that, project's done. We did it. We fixed the weird listing that was happening when the droid wasn't at the complete goal line. Add a little bit more information to our game screen. I didn't have time to add like a refresh menu option, so I'm just going to ask the players to refresh the webpage. They want to try to go again. And then we also added some background music, courtesy of Streambeats. They have a lot of really fun chiptune and arcade style music. So I'm using a couple of their songs that I've also used for this video. And yeah, and that's it. I was able to finish this game by May 4th or on May 4th. So I posted it on itch, and I've basically been spending the past 3 weeks editing this video, which is really long, a lot longer than my normal videos. But I am excited with how it turned out. Originally, I wanted to have different stages of things you lift, like rocks to droid to spaceship. We only had time to just do the one stage, which isn't too bad, and a nice little victory music. And that's it. That's the game all done and dusted. Also, just for fun, as you finish your skill check, I have all the particles just zoom up in space because I think that looks fun. But yeah, that's it. It's done. We did our little game jam project. And if you did stick around for the whole thing, thank you for checking it out. Feel free to go check out the game on itch.io. Like all my projects, I love the idea of continuing developing this if I have some time. And I'm also very excited to jump on to the next one. But feel free to comment on what you'd like to see added or changed, or if you have any other ideas for future self-imposed game jam projects. Feel free to like and subscribe. I feel cheesy saying that. I'm looking forward to hear everyone's feedback, and thanks so much for checking it out. I appreciate it. Have a good one. Ciao. Oh, also, hopefully everyone had a good May 4th and May 5th and May 6th, however many of those May holidays you celebrate, and enjoy the rest of your week. Ciao. All right, I should probably go build that Lego now.